Okay. So I've never had a reason to look into anxiety. I guess I should say I never had a reason before to look into anxiety. Never had a reason to concern myself with it. And the reason why was because it was not a part of my life. I had felt anxious, but that anxious feeling, whether it was fear or what have you, would subside as soon as the event that instigated it ended. For example, like if I was in a new school, and I began to get comfortable with the school, it would go away. If I was at a party and there was nobody there that, people there that I wasn't really familiar with, I would be anxious insofar as I'd be a bit nervous there. But as soon as I kind of said, okay, cool, let's go mingle, I would just start going around and talking to people, and then that nervousness would go away. Being nervous on a first date, being anxious on a first date, what if she doesn't like me, different things like that. But it was never anything that triggered a severe reaction, right? It wasn't like an overwhelming sensation. It was more of like a passing feeling. But the circumstances of my life have changed in a incredibly fantastic way. But what this has also done is it's given me reason to look into anxiety. And the result is that now I want to understand it better than, I want to understand it as best I can, because I want to see the world through their eyes. I want to see how they view the world with anxiety. And so last week, over the week of Thanksgiving, I went to Barnes & Noble and I bought several books, bought 3 books on how anxiety works. One of them is like a really, really short book, a really, really small book. This one is about a medium book, the one that I have right now. And then of course I've got a lengthier book where it looks at it more from like a clinical standpoint, whereas this looks at it more it talks to you about anxiety from the perspective of a person who doesn't have it. So basically it's like, like the author is like, I have anxiety, here's what my life is like, that kind of situation. And so this book itself is actually very, very illuminating. And that's the reason why the video is not titled Anxiety According to Rob, because I don't know enough about it to speak intelligently on it. I'm dipping my toe in the water here. And again, as time passes, I will gain a much better understanding of it, both from what they tell me as well as what I read on my own. But this book has been pretty illuminating so far. So the first chapter here is called, or really kind of focuses on anxiety and trying to understand it, kind of like an overview sort of situation. What it says here is, everyone has anxiety. Who hasn't experienced a racing heart, sweaty palms, a jumpy stomach, shortness of breath, trouble sleeping, restlessness, or a mind that just won't quiet down? Anxiety is a normal occurrence that alerts the brain and body that something isn't right. It would actually be detrimental if we didn't experience anxiety on occasion, because then we might not react appropriately to genuine threats to our safety or well-being. And that's one of the cool things here, is because that opening paragraph really sort of shines a light on the notion that anxiety is more of a biological response. It's the mind's alert system. It's the mind's alert system to a situation that could otherwise be perceived to be dangerous. You're thrown into a situation that you're unfamiliar with, right? You go on a hike and you wander too far into the woods, and suddenly you're in totally unfamiliar territory. You'll go into fight or flight. You'll be on a heightened state of alert. You'll be looking around, making sure there's no predators, bears that come out of the middle of nowhere or something like that. You'd be far more alert under that circumstance than you would be if you were like in the city. If you were in like a part of the town you didn't recognize. Because even then, even if it's not a part of town that you recognize, it's still a town of people, which means like you can call for help and a person will respond. But when you're kind of out there in the middle of nowhere, there is no help coming for you. And it can be very, very panicky and very, 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 very freaky. And so then it goes on to try to answer the question, what is anxiety? And even the book itself admits that this is any definition that's offered is an ambiguous definition. Case in point, while we don't know exactly what causes anxiety, we do know that the capacity to feel anxious is biologically hardwired into us, something we talked about a second ago. Some people are more susceptible to feeling anxious than others, but as yet, there is not a definitive biological explanation for this. In addition, how people react to anxiety is a combination of many factors, including genetics, life history, self-esteem, past exposure to stress and trauma, current medical and psychological conditions, and previous experience handling stress, to name just a few. As a result, anxiety is a highly subjective experience, meaning each person feels it uniquely. What may trigger only a mildly anxious feeling in one person can result in a full-blown panic attack in another. Now, in reality, I'd never viewed anxiety that way. To me, anxiety was kind of like this universal definition for a thing that like a large group of people all feel, like sadness or happiness or something along those lines. I never saw it as subjective. And it makes sense, right? I mean, this talks about anxiety in a general term, but take a person who has social anxiety. They might differ from somebody who has a different, another type of anxiety where they worry about things or something like that. But you take a person with social anxiety and you throw them into a social setting, that's a nightmare. I mean, that's nightmare fuel is what that is. I take you with social anxiety and I walk you into a bar full of people. I mean, a bar just full of people. And you've got social anxiety in the extreme to where you're almost an agoraphobic, to where you're almost like you stay in your house and you're afraid of everything outside. But in your instance, it's more of just a fear of people. And so you being in a social situation like that is terrifying. I take you and I throw you in a bar full of people and I say, see those three guys over there? Start a conversation with them. That'd be terrifying to you. For someone like me, I would walk up to him and just say, hey guys, I couldn't help but overhear your conversation. You guys mind if I join in? And they would respond in one of two ways. They would say, yeah, man, they'd welcome me in by some form or fashion, well, what do you think about this? Or they would say, this is actually more like a closed conversation, man, and they would send me on my way and I would say, okay, cool. And I would go sit down. But for a person with social anxiety, I can't help but believe that they would look at that situation in this fashion, right? Like this is how they would perceive it. There are people over there that I want to go talk to, but I don't know what to say. And I feel like if I went over there, I would get there and I'd be standing there looking at them and then I wouldn't know what to say. And because I wouldn't know what to say, they would look at me like I'm a weirdo and they would be like, who's this weird guy standing here not knowing what to say to us, or weird woman, standing here not knowing what to say to us, and then they would look at me expecting me to say something, but the more they expected me to say something, the more nervous I would get. And the more nervous I would get, the more, I would start to freak out. I would just panic. My mind would go blank. And so here I am standing in front of these people looking like a goof. They're expecting me to say something. I'm standing there looking awkward, not saying anything. Maybe they start laughing at me. They're like, man, who the heck is this person? While that's going on, everybody else in the bar starts looking at me like, who is this weirdo standing in front of these guys? Is he going to pick a fight or something like that? And then one of those guys chimes up and says, what's your problem, weirdo? And then suddenly they start laughing at me. Then the rest of the bar starts laughing at me. And here I am sitting in this bar getting laughed at by everybody in it because I don't know how to have a conversation. I'm not even going to try. I feel like a person with social anxiety, their mind would work in that fashion, that it would follow that train of thought. Now, moving on to the thought process, because my idea here was, if a person with anxiety suffers from a condition whereby the alert system in their brain doesn't shut off, it doesn't turn off when the threat is gone. It just constantly perceives the world, in a constant state of danger, or it perceives them in a constant state of danger, where the alert system's constantly going off. Then in turn, what do they think? Like how do, what kind of thoughts do they think under that circumstance? Where I might believe that a person with social anxiety, might respond that way, or a person with anxiety might respond that way, how would they actually respond? And the book addresses that. The book says, the thoughts people experience when feeling anxious are commonly referred to as worry, quote unquote. Everyone worries sometimes, but people who are experiencing persistent anxiety have more worry thoughts than typical and struggle to think of other things. Here are some common worry thoughts. What if blank happens? I can't cope with this. I'll never be able to handle blank. This is too much for me. I'm going to fail. I have to be in control. I might as well give up now. This isn't going to work no matter how hard I try. Everyone is going to laugh at me. I must be going crazy. One final thing this book talks about before we kind of get into the video proper is it tries to differentiate between everyday anxiety and an anxiety disorder. What it says here is that it can be a fine line to distinguish between everyday anxiety and a diagnosable condition. Often the distinction hinges on whether people describe symptoms of anxiety that interfere with their quality of life, are pervasive, and negatively impact their performance, whether that's in one area of life or across all situations. What I'm gathering from this book, or at least what I did, what I gathered when I first read it, was that people with anxiety suffer from a condition where the alert system in their brain that warns them of danger never shuts off. By whatever standard or whatever means, due to no small number of variables, that switch gets turned on and it never turns off again. And they're constantly worried that something's going to go wrong. They're constantly worried things are going to go south. And it seems like it would make life incredibly difficult. It would make life wildly difficult for a person. Like take, for example, somebody in a relationship, somebody involved in love. I imagine that from their perspective, anxiety comes out in such a way of, what if they leave me? What if they break up with me? What if I say something or do something that leads them to leave? What if I push them away? A person looking at anxiety from another perspective, maybe on the job, what if I mess up? What if I go into this interview and everything goes south and just the worst possible situation happens? What I'm understanding here is that people with anxiety are scared almost all the time. They're worried almost all the time. And their mind deviates to the negative. The worst possible thing that could happen is exactly what's going to happen. I look at that and I think about that from the perspective of a person who suffered from depression, right? And I'm not trying to relate the two or to say, like, I know your struggle with anxiety. I don't. But as a person who suffered from depression, like, it's an everyday battle. And one of the things, I'll do this, like, one day I will fire up this camera and I'll start recording on a bad day. And I'll show you guys what a bad day is like, because it's almost night and day. Like, I just deviate towards every ounce of just, like, every bad mistake I made, every negative emotion I feel, every bit of self-doubt just flies to the surface, and I basically spend the whole day feeling like I'm not worth a damn, or however long that bad moment lasts for. Sometimes it's half a day, sometimes it's for an hour or two, sometimes it's for days. And so, it's in that mindset, when I'm in that situation, it's like this voice in my head, that basically says, like, these are all the crappy things about you. These are all the terrible things about you. Here's how little everyone cares about you. And it just won't shut up. Like, it just won't stop. And this person that I'm very close to related that to me and said that that's how they feel. That in their mind, it's a constant voice of worry. It's a constant voice of concern, and it won't stop. And they explained it so incredibly well. What they said is that there were like two parts of their brain, right? The logical part that understands how things really are. And then the anxious part that just won't shut up and keeps telling them, like, the worst possible thing is going to happen. And in the face of that, reading this book, reading the two other books that I have, I've walked away with a better understanding of anxiety, but also understanding how much further I have to go to really, really be able to grasp it. But I've also learned that reassurance is the name of the game. That as someone who's close to someone, who's very close to someone with anxiety, that it's not just enough to say everything will be okay. You have to show them that. That was my statement, That's what I told them. The conversation that we had stays between them and myself. I will not divulge that in this video. But suffice it to say, I understood that action was more important than words in that circumstance, like so many other circumstances in life. But that there's also a measure of, I guess, tenderness and care that comes into that. That what they're looking for is something, a circumstance whereby they can tell you anything. Their restless mind can just wander aimlessly. Their anxiety can just spew out in front of you, and you won't laugh at them, and you won't judge them, and you won't tell them that they're stupid for feeling that way. That you're going to be reassuring, that you're just going to listen and offer words of encouragement. And that's not something that I'm unfamiliar with, right? I'd like to think that I'm very, very good at making other people feel good about themselves, when they're not being an idiot, anyway, when they're not doing something crazy. Like, hey man, I was involved in a hit and run accident. It was a terrible situation. At that point, I'm not going to be like, yeah, man, that's just, God, dude, are you okay? I'm going to be like, why did you leave? That's going to be my reaction to that circumstance. But yeah, it really is eye-opening to study anxiety and to see how a person views the world with anxiety. I think that understanding this brings me closer to them. It brings me much closer to them than before. because that's because these barriers are sort of coming down. And as they come down, there's a strong closeness that begins to emerge there, kind of a bond that forms, much stronger than the one that we already have. And I like that. I like to be their person to come to for that, for those things, like I like reassuring them and making sure they know that I'm not going anywhere, that I will be here forever and ever and ever and ever. That's never a concern they need to have. But yeah, it's a very eye-opening experience sitting down and learning about this and talking to someone who suffers from this. It's a very eye-opening experience. And it's something that I definitely want to learn more about, because the more I learn about it, the better I will understand them. And the better I will understand them, the more I will continue to love them. So it's a very important thing. It's a very, very good thing to be able to be able to, to grasp this. But, this really, it doesn't have like a moral tale at the end of it. There's no cautionary tale. I'm not going to break out into the legend of Icarus, or anything along those lines. The tragedy of Icarus. He flew too close to the sun and his wings melted. Nothing along those lines. It's just I like talking about things like this sometimes, because I think it's important to share that. To say, hey, look, like this is a thing that I'm looking at, that I'm studying, and I think it kind of creates some measure of closeness between you guys and me. I mean, not to offend you guys, but you guys are not my motivation for learning about anxiety. You guys were never on my mind when I sat down and wanted to learn about anxiety. And again, I don't say that to be a dick. I did say that to let you guys know that this person that I'm close to, I'm very close to, and they are someone that I care deeply for, and I want to understand them as best as I possibly can. And this, I think, makes that happen. But, yeah, no, it's just an interesting situation, just an interesting scenario, learning about anxiety, understanding this. But anyway, yeah, I'm going to go ahead and stop rambling, guys. With that being said, we're going to bring this video to an end. And, yeah, I will catch you all later. Peace.